let's dive into a fascinating and honestly pretty confusing legal puzzle. Imagine you're a Filipino citizen, you marry a foreigner, things don't work out, and you get a divorce in another country. You should be free to move on, right? Well, for a very long time, the answer wasn't a simple yes or no. It was this strange legal limbo.
So picture this. You are legally divorced and single in, say, the United States or Japan. You are completely free to move on with your life, even get married again. But then you look at your status back home in the Philippines, and the law there says you're still married to your ex. How on earth is that even possible?
And this created a situation that was, let's be honest, just completely absurd and unfair. After a foreign divorce, the non-Filipino spouse was legally single. They could go on their merry way. But because the Philippines doesn't have absolute divorce, the Filipino spouse was often stuck, legally tied to a marriage that was, for all intents and purposes, already over.
To really understand how we got out of this mess and how the law changed, we need to look at a real-life story. It's a story about a real marriage that got caught right in the middle of two different legal systems.
All right, so let's meet the people at the heart of our story. Cynthia Galapon, a Filipina, and her husband at the time, Nar Shik Park, who was a South Korean national. Their personal journey through the courts would end up changing how the entire country reads its own laws on marriage.
So here's the quick rundown. Cynthia and Park get married in Manila, but just a few months later, it's over, and they get a divorce by mutual agreement over in South Korea. Fast forward a couple of years, and Cynthia does what she thinks is the next logical step. She goes to a Philippine court to get that Korean divorce officially recognized.
Now, this one simple petition kicked off a legal battle that would drag on for years, taking her case from a local courtroom all the way to the steps of the Supreme Court. So let's follow that winding path. Her journey starts at square one, the Regional Trial Court, or RTC. This is the ground floor for cases like hers, the local level where it all begins.
And you know what? At first, things went great. The RTC looked at her South Korean divorce papers and said, yep, this looks valid. They declared her free to remarry under Philippine law. For Cynthia, this must have felt like a huge sigh of relief, the end of the line.
So, hold on. If she won, why are we still talking about her? You'd think that's the end of the story, right? Well, not so fast. Because someone else decided to step into the ring with a big objection.
That's right. The Philippine government itself, through its top lawyer, the Office of the Solicitor General, appealed the decision. They basically said, whoa, not so fast, the local court got this wrong. And that appeal sent Cynthia's case one level up the legal ladder to the Court of Appeals.
And the government's entire case, their whole argument, all hinged on a super strict, very literal, almost robotic reading of one specific part of Philippine law.
This is it. This is the legal provision that caused all the trouble. Article 26, paragraph 2 of the Family Code. Now, this is the rule that allows a Filipino to get a foreign divorce recognized, but the exact words here are everything.
Here's the catch. The law specifically says the divorce must be obtained by the alien spouse. So the government's argument was painfully simple. Cynthia and Park's divorce was mutual. They got it together. So it wasn't obtained only by the alien spouse. Therefore, the law doesn't apply.
And you know what? The Court of Appeals agreed with that incredibly strict reading. They overturned the lower court's decision because Cynthia had agreed to the divorce. They said she couldn't benefit from the law. Just like that, her victory was erased. And legally, in the Philippines, she was right back to being a married woman. But Cynthia wasn't about to give up. She appealed that decision, taking her case all the way to the top, the Supreme Court of the Philippines. And this set the stage for a decision that would change everything. This case really put a fundamental question before the Supreme Court. Should a law be interpreted so literally that it creates a completely unfair and, well, absurd outcome? The very absurd situation the law was actually supposed to fix. So, the Supreme Court did something brilliant. They decided to look behind the words on the page. They stopped asking, what does the law say? And started asking, what was the law for? What was the original intent here?
And looking at a previous big case, they found their answer. They said, look, the whole point of this law is to prevent this exact kind of ridiculous one-sided marriage. They realize that it doesn't matter who files the papers, if the foreigner does it, if the Filipino does it, or if they do it together, the end result is the same. A Filipino is stuck in a marriage that doesn't exist anymore.
By focusing on the purpose over the literal text, the Supreme Court was finally ready to resolve this legal contradiction once and for all.
And this led to a massive new precedent. The Supreme Court declared that it doesn't matter anymore who files for the foreign divorce, whether it's the foreigner, the Filipino, or both of them together. As long as it's a valid divorce, it can be recognized in the Philippines. This was a total game changer.
So here's the key takeaway, the bottom line. The focus isn't on who started the paperwork. It's about the result. Is the divorce legitimate under that foreign country's laws? And does it mean the foreigner can legally remarry? If the answer is yes, then the Filipino spouse deserves that same freedom.
I mean, can you imagine the legal roller coaster for Cynthia? She gets a win in the local court, then a crushing defeat at the Court of Appeals, and then finally, a huge, history-making victory at the Supreme Court, a decision that didn't just help her, but thousands of others in the same boat.
So after that long, hard fight, the Supreme Court put the original decision back in place. Cynthia Galapon was, at long last, legally single in her own country. Her persistence literally changed the law for the better.
And this whole story leaves us with a bigger question to think about, doesn't it? Cynthia's case is a powerful reminder that sometimes the true justice of a law isn't in its exact wording, but in the spirit and purpose behind it. It really makes you wonder, what other laws out there are just waiting for a similar re-examination?